So it's time for us to go and take a look at the Google Pixel 4a and see how this particular phone holds up in 2024. Now, the thing I will definitely tell you about the Pixel 4a is that this is a very interesting phone because it's not a perfect device anymore, but it was a very good approach from Google when they first announced and released this phone back in 2020. And what was very interesting about this phone back then was that I genuinely thought in a lot of different ways this was a better phone than the main flagship of that time, which was the Google Pixel 4 and the 4 XL. Now, although I'm not using this phone on an everyday basis, I use an iPhone, I will tell you, I still use my Pixel 4a almost as a secondary device. I keep this phone in my book bag all the time. I never take it out of my book bag. That way, when I travel or if I'm going somewhere, I can still have this phone or an Android phone on me so I can still make videos on my second channel, even the third channel sometimes. So now you know, I use this phone quite a bit. I still love it a lot. If you do want to pick up some phones that I would recommend buying this year though, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the exterior of the Google Pixel 4a, on the front of this particular phone, you did have that 5.81-inch OLED display on it. It was 1080p, and this was a very good display, I would say, for the type of phone that they made. This was like a sub $400 phone back in 2020. This was, I think, like $350-ish back in 2020. So when you think about that, you have to think about this is not $1,000 phone. There are lots of cost-cutting features Apple or Google put it within this phone. They had to cut corners here and there, but for $350, I mean that's a very good price, and this phone is significantly cheaper now. And this display was arguably pretty good. It was a 60 hertz panel, so no 90 hertz here, but even then, still a very good 60 hertz panel for the most part. You were getting the hole punch display, which I loved a lot. This was the first hole punch display Google ever put on any of their phones, which is funny because this is actually the cheapest, like this was the cheapest phone they made, or one of the cheapest phones. So for it being that cheap and having this type of display and everything was genuinely very, very crazy to me. Now, on top of that, you were still getting, I guess like a plastic build quality, which wasn't the biggest deal in the world. I would still say having a plastic build is terrible in 2024, but back then in 2020, for them kind of creating a phone for that price tag, I could kind of overlook that this phone was pretty much completely built out of plastic, and even feeling it now, it doesn't feel that great, obviously, but that's a reason why I keep it in my book bag, is because I'm not afraid of the glass breaking on the bag or it getting scratched up. It's made out of plastic, and if it breaks, I can just go buy another one. These are very, very cheap nowadays. On the bottom, you are getting a USB Type-C port and a headphone jack. At this point, Google had already removed their headphone jacks from their phones, so by having a headphone jack on this type of device was genuinely very surprising to me. I was not expecting that, and with the Pixel 4a, even though they made the 3a before this, I think the 4a was a very, very big upgrade, and I do think that was a massive change coming around previously than the Pixel, than the standard Pixel 3a they made right before this. On the backside, you were having this complete plastic back, and you were getting a single camera setup on the backside as well. So definitely not the most premium feeling device of all time, but I do appreciate what Google did here, and they did try to make a really good budget phone, and I think they excelled from that particular standpoint. However, when you look at a phone nowadays, even most budget phone nowadays, there are lots of things that this phone is missing out on, so I don't want to paint this phone as like a perfect phone. One, obviously no 90 hertz or 120 hertz display. Those can be some big turnoffs for some people. There is no IP certification on this phone, so there is no certified water resistance. It may be water resistant here and there, but it's not certified, so you can never trust it. I would assume that this phone is not a good durable phone from that standpoint. On top of that, there is no glass back. That can also be a big difference for a lot of people picking up this phone. And there's no wireless charging on this phone either, and no dual camera or triple camera setup. So when you look at those things, if those things are important to you, clearly I would not recommend buying this phone. But for a lot of people, for the price that this phone retailed for, it was genuinely very surprising at that time. So from the exterior, that kind of covers it up there. Now from the camera side of things, this phone on the back had a 12.2 megapixel wide angle camera, and on the front it had an 8 megapixel wide angle camera. Now surprisingly, at that point back in 2020, this phone's camera actually wasn't really that bad. Even now when I go ahead and open it up, it's not terrible, but there are lots of things and lots of differences as to why I am not the biggest fan of this particular phone anymore. And one, I do feel like the whole entire camera UI is a little glitchy. Because this phone wasn't like the best performing phone of all time, and it's gotten a couple software updates here and there, it definitely is a little bit of an outdated type of device when it comes down to it. Again, it's not the biggest deal in the world or anything like that, but when it does kind of come down to it, that can be kind of a big turnoff for some people. So just that right there in and of itself, kind of keep that in mind. And I will also say, I mean, there's no 4K 60 on the front or anything like that. There's not even 4K 60 on the back. But I will tell you, it's not a terrible camera, and if you still have to take photos and videos with it, it can definitely get the job done. but from all the years I've been using this camera and comparing it against all the other Pixels in iPhones that came out after this, it definitely is not the best camera in the world, but it still gets the job done. And I would say back then in 2020, it was more of a pro than a con, but now I'm probably going to say it really might be a con when it kind of comes down to picking up this phone in this day and age. But probably the biggest con as of right now is probably its software updates. It's not really getting any more software updates when it comes down to it, and that can be kind of a big issue for some people. Like if you're wanting to go ahead and buy that next generation of device, you probably wanted to still maintain some software updates here and there. Last year, this phone was still getting software updates. This year, although it may still be getting some security updates here and there, it's not really going to be this like long-lasting phone anymore. And once again, that can be a really big turnoff for some people. Like if you're wanting to buy a phone, you probably wanted to still have a bunch of software updates and a bunch of features ahead of it. And this phone is not really going to be giving you that. So keep that as you will or take that as you will. But I will say if you are wanting a better phone that will still be giving you some software updates here and there, maybe a phone like the Pixel 6a might be the better way to go if you still want to stay within the A lineup. I would not buy the 7a in the brand new market or the 8a when it comes out if you're watching this way later in the year. You're probably better off buying the standard, Pixel 7 or Pixel 8 in a used market. That might be a better deal for some people, honestly. So performance-wise though, this was also another interesting thing with this phone. This phone had the Snapdragon 730G chipset inside with 6 gigabytes of RAM. And that's actually a very decent amount of RAM and decent amount of performance to have inside of this device. Now, this was also, the Pixel 5 was the last, Snapdragon chipset phone, but this was one of the last Snapdragon chipset phones inside of a Google Pixel before they made the Tensor chipset. And within this particular device, I will tell you, it definitely wasn't a bad or terrible phone or a terrible performing phone. I think Google did a really good job with this device, and from a lot of different use cases that I've used this, particular phone with, it was pretty good. Even when I use it, in this day and age, it's definitely glitchy and it definitely can be a little annoying sometimes, but it's really not as bad as you think. And I would say this is probably the lowest performing chipset they put in a phone, or one of the lowest performing chipsets they put in a phone of that year, but it's still not a terrible performing device. And I would say, like, if I had to, I could definitely use this thing, but I would probably argue that if you're going to want to play big intensive games like Genshin Impact or Call of Duty Mobile, or if you plan on using this phone and going, crazy with it, if you're planning on, doing super intensive things with your phone, this may not be the best phone for you. But from everything I've really ever done with this device, I've kind of had a good time with it, and I really haven't had to complain about it too much as like a secondary phone almost. So what I will tell you, and to kind of sum up this whole entire video, I definitely do think the Google Pixel 4a is a great phone when it first came out, or was a great phone when it first came out. I just really don't think it's necessarily a phone I would recommend the average person to buy anymore. I think you are much better off purchasing devices that are still supported with software and they still have a lot of capability within them. And I think the Google Pixel 4a is still a good phone. It's only one version of software behind. But I would say, like, if you're going to go ahead and buy a new phone, you probably want it to have, a future ahead of it. And this phone isn't really giving you a future ahead of it, which can be, once again, kind of a downside for some people. So in terms of that perspective, that kind of covers it up here for the most part. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.